After 35 long weeks, the 2023 grid ranking has come to an end. Max Verstappen becomes the first person to lead the grid ranking every week of the season. He is also the second Formula One driver to win the grid ranking, joining Lewis Hamilton from 2022. Max has the largest margin of victory over second place Alex Palou, who is the highest finishing IndyCar driver ever. Now, both Palou and Verstappen have a 100% top 10 finish rate. However, Max also has a 100% top 5 finish rate as well. Now, Verstappen had a 90% podium finish rate and a 78% win rate in 2023. So now let's bring everyone in for this question. Joey, we'll start with you. Will we ever, and do we ever, want to see such a high level of dominance again?
Well, so there's a lot of things that played into this level of dominance. You know, we have the longest season we've ever had in F1. We've had the smart team that Red Bull is finally getting on top of their car, which they haven't really done in the V6 turbo hybrid era like this before. And we have a driver like Max Verstappen, who is someone who really just doesn't make mistakes when the car is suited to him. So that combo is what led to this era of dominance. And I don't think we're going to see a season like this ever again. They won all but one race, and this was their shot at it. I think Singapore is going to be a stain on what could have been a perfect record, and I don't think they're going to have another opportunity at that. So I'm kind of happy that we aren't going to see it again, and I don't think we will. What about you guys?
Yeah, Joey. I tend to agree. I definitely don't want to see another season like this ever again in Formula One. I know the Mercedes era of domination, you know, it was a little painful at times, but the Red Bull era of domination, it was a little,
Right.
it was even more painful to watch, because we really want to see a lot more parity in Formula One. And while it was very frustrating to watch Red Bull win almost every single race this season, I do respect what they were able to do. I respect the car that they were able to build. The engineering staff, Adrian Newey, for designing an amazing car that will go down in history as one of the greatest cars in the history of Formula One. And Max Verstappen as well. Kudos to him for the impressive historic season he's had. I certainly respect everything that they accomplished this year, but I want it to be a one and done thing, and hopefully we'll never see that again. I know the one thing that's probably frustrating to Red Bull, I know our own Ben Snyder even said this. He says you either go all in for the perfect season or not, and it has to sting a little bit, you know, to win every single race but Singapore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every race is Singapore, that's going to stand out. Earlier, y'all mentioned how Verstappen has over 50 wins, Lewis Hamilton, and then the third highest is all the way Bottas with only 10, and then everyone's single digits. That just shows the dominance we've had in Formula One with Mercedes, now Red Bull. Can the competition rise up? Potentially, we're seeing some of that, but the big thing, you got to catch Red Bull. If they come out with another strong car, Max Verstappen, the talent he has, what he did this year, leaps and bounds ahead of his teammate and the rest of the field, it could be another long year. Will we ever see it again? I don't think so. I think they're going to have to start closing up the gap. The other drivers, the other teams, they're going to be looking at 2024 as an other opportunity. Then, of course, the new regulations 2026. Do we ever want to see it again? It's something where I know it didn't make exactly the most exciting F1 season, but you look at the historical aspect to say we witnessed that. I still remember when Schumacher dominated F1 like it was nothing. The old Ferrari back then. You will remember it, but yeah, I think it'll be safe to say prefer not to see someone just dominate on that level again.
Yeah. Before we move on, Kobe, I did want to build on what you were saying. You know, you're talking about the Mercedes and Hamilton dominance. What made that feel so different? Because it definitely does feel different. And I think part of it was, you know, early on, Vettel was the only one who was really contending with them in the Ferrari. And then later on, you had Max Verstappen really being the only one contending with Mercedes in the Red Bull. This year, the amount of people that were on the podium that weren't from Red Bull feels like there was so much potential in this season that we didn't get because it culminated with, it was accompanied by this dominance. And with a series where you have 2 drivers, 2 cars, but 3 spots on the podium, there is no way for a team to lock out the podium. And with Perez having the performance issues that he did, we saw so many other teams up there. And it wasn't like we were seeing Mercedes 2-3. We weren't seeing just a second dominant team like we did in those other days. So it feels more like we got robbed of a really competitive season as well. I think that's one of the reasons this feels so different.
Yeah, you guys all bring great points, and Joey, especially with that last point about how there wasn't just one team besides Red Bull that was dominant. You know, we saw a variety of drivers standing up on the podium throughout the races. This season could have been so amazing, you know, had Red Bull not had the dominant season that they have had. But you know, going back to the question, as we've all agreed, you know, a general consensus that we would not like to see such a level of dominance again. But you can't deny how amazing this season was for Red Bull, specifically for Max Verstappen, and just um, you know how a season like this you would consider impossible unless you see it happen like we did this season. But anyways, continuing with the grid ranking now, as we all know, the Formula One championship was decided very early compared to the other motorsport series. 6 of the 7 series in the grid ranking use a full season point system. F1, IndyCar, and World Rally Championship were decided before the final race weekend, whereas Formula E and Supercars were decided on the final weekend before the final race. And MotoGP was the only series to go to the season's final race. Now, 2 people who consistently stood out in some traditionally very competitive series and who took the championship. For the first time in 17 years in IndyCar, we have Alex Palou, who won, and the title was decided early on. And in Formula E, with only 2 wins, we had Jake Dennis, who was consistent in a traditionally chaotic Formula E season. Now, in 2021, after the first lap crash in Alabama, the opening race of the year, Colton Herta said that everyone has one mulligan, or one bad race. In 2023, Alex Palou did not have a bad race. Dennis had a couple of bad races, but so many podiums as well. Now, Kobe, we'll start with you for this question. Do you think that everyone has to step up their game next year and consistently be in the top 10 in their respective series?
Yeah, but yeah, minus a few racers, like you mentioned with Alex Palou, Max Verstappen having a really great season. It seemed like everyone else, just had a really inconsistent season. Following the grid ranking and looking at the results across all the different series in the grid ranking, you have one week of drivers finishing second, the next week he's 20th, and then it's just like a seesaw, up and down, up and down, and that's why you were able to see, like Max Verstappen and some others towards the top of the grid ranking, able to jump out to big lead in their series. And if you look to the very bottom of the grid ranking, scores are really, really low, like in embarrassing levels of low, because we always saw so much inconsistency across the board. So I think if drivers in the grid ranking want to be able to improve their scores in 2023, they definitely need to step up their game a lot and be more consistent and the top 10, because the one thing about the grid ranking, you need to win a lot and you need to be really consistent, or otherwise you're not even going to show up in the ranking, or you're going to be towards the bottom of the board.
Yeah, I know 19 drivers in Formula One that need to step up their game. Looking at that graphic again, the next Formula One driver is in 21st position. Now, we've got some math that goes on to calculate this, but it really throws into sharp relief just how dominant this season has been for Max Verstappen. When we talk about the dominance of Alex Palou compared to that, Scott Dixon's down there, I think 5th or 6th. This is completely different situation between the 2 series. And, it's one of the complaints that people have had for Formula One is that, you get into this dominant era and there's nothing that other teams can do. Whereas in other series, it's anybody's game, going into a weekend. So I don't know. I think they're in other series. It's just as much, there's just as much opportunity for other drivers, but in Formula One, we really need to see the rest of the teams and the rest of the drivers progress.
Especially in Formula One, as you mentioned, you got to see the rest of the teams. Crazy to think that after Austria, the Austrian Grand Prix, McLaren was the highest scoring team, and Lando Norris was on a tear, just scoring points after points after points. The consistency level, Verstappen had it, Red Bull had it, if Sergio Perez was performing up to level. really nobody else had it. Then you look at IndyCar, Formula E, Jake Dennis, Alex Palou. What a masterful season. Yeah, Jake Dennis had a couple DNFs, a string of DNFs, but when he finished races, he was on the podium, a high podium finish rate. And then the NASCAR Cup Series, the inconsistency there, of course, they have a playoff format, so they go for wins. They're more willing to take risks that will result in DNFs. No driver in the top 10 from the NASCAR Cup Series. William Byron looked like he was going to get there, but 12th place. So overall, it was just the consistency has to rise up, not just in the series we mentioned, but all over, I think, because at the end of the day, Max Verstappen is going to look really tough to beat. If you're going to have Alex Palou, he had a great season. If Max Verstappen wasn't as dominant, Alex Palou could have easily been the grid ranking world champion. We saw Pekka Bagnaia make a move up with his 7th win this year. In your respective series, you got to be consistent. You got to get those wins, and you just really got to dominate. I know we talked about we don't want to see somebody dominate like Max Verstappen again, but if you want to be there contending in the grid ranking, you got to be going out there getting the championships in your respective series, and consistency will pay off with that.